Welcome back to the Houndsman XP podcast, everybody. As we close in on Father's Day, I had an opportunity to sit down with one of my good friends who wanted to pay tribute and honor his father. The way this podcast came about was really pretty interesting. So I was driving to North Carolina to meet another person for an interview for this podcast. And we ended up having to cancel or postpone because of traffic, and I was running late, things like that. And I just picked up the phone because I was close by. Picked up the phone and called my friend T.L. Jones and asked him if I could stop by and chat. And he actually told me on the phone that he was going to call me and see if we could do a podcast where we honored his father, Terry Jones. With no prior planning and being 4.5 hours away from the house on a mission to do another podcast, this podcast was created. And to add another layer to the story, it was recorded on the 6th anniversary of Terry Jones' death. I really hope you hang in there and you listen to every word of this podcast. You're going to hear the story of a man that lived his life in a way that most of us strive to live our lives, to make that positive, lasting impact and build that legacy as a man and as a hunter, as a father, as a grandfather. Even though my time with Terry Jones was very limited and brief, and a lot of the exposure that I got of Terry was through his son Tracy, vicariously, sharing stories, talking about how we were raised, things like that. It was just impactful on my life, and it helped me shape my value system as a father and as a man and as now a grandfather. And I really hope that you guys are going to enjoy this one. Tracy has put a lot of the lessons that he learned from his dad and other influential men in his life into a book called The Old Men. And while this is not a podcast to promote that book, we couldn't help spending some time to talk about it. And we're going to do a special giveaway in conjunction with this podcast. Tracy has sent me a few books, and we want to give those away. We're going to give them away to you, the listeners. I'm not going to make a Facebook post out of this and force people to go try to force people or trick people into listening to a podcast. This is for you, the people that tune in, that are engaged with the message and the things that we're trying to do here at Houndsman XP. So I'm going to need people to send me an email. And this is the question that you need to answer. One of Terry Jones' famous sayings, he laid out his philosophy on how to kill more bear. Send me that line in an email and send the email to info.houndsmanxp@gmail.com. In the subject line, just call it The Old Men. Include your name, your mailing address. I've got 5 copies, so don't delay. And if you want to get a copy of this, I'm telling you, you need to buy this for your son who's going into manhood. You need to buy it for your son if he's already a man and trying to raise a family. This book is valuable, and it's easy to read. And you can find it by doing an Amazon search or going to laddertreepublications.com. Or just reach out to T.L. Jones on Facebook, send him a message, and he'll tell you how to find it. Let's get down to it. For this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast, this is a box shaker. It's time to dump the box. I got diverted on my route today and had to have a backup plan and call on my good friend Tracy Jones, and I'm lucky enough to be sitting in Greenville, Tennessee.
It's good to have you. It's a beautiful day.
It is beautiful. It's a little bit muggy out there. That's pretty normal for this part of the world, though.
It is. Yeah, just about 2-3 weeks we'll be cutting hay.
It's about where we're at. We're probably a month out. Mine's looking good. My hay's looking real good. Timothy and the orchard grass has all got good heads on it right now. And
Mine's okay. I need to reseed.
Do you?
Yeah, this fall I need to reseed. I'm not thick enough.
Yeah. Mine's thick, but I've also got some weeds coming into it. It's
Yeah.
got some ironweed and some different stuff coming in, so I have to do some work on that. But I asked you earlier, Tracy, what you're going to do with all your money now that you're a big celebrated author.
I'm going to go up to Wisconsin and buy a cabin and fix that up and have that so we can go up there and this summer and train.
There you
But
go.
that's after I get, my first million. So we'll see when that happens.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I started reading that book, and it's called The Old Men, and it's from, is it Ladder Tree Publications?
Yes.
Yep. That's the company that you put it under.
Yes, sir.
And there's a whole story behind all that. And just tell why you picked those two things, Ladder Tree and The Old Man. Just kind of sum this thing up for us, because it's going to tie into what we're going to talk about.
Okay. Well, some time ago when I was given the opportunity to write an article for Bear Hunting Magazine, you sort of got to pick a name.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and I discussed it some.
We did.
And at the time, I picked the name of Sacred Pursuit because that sort of summarizes the philosophy that I have about life and hunting and all things.
Right.
When I went to publish the book, the guy who helped me publish it said, even if you self-publish, they want you to have the name of a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's your own, they want you to have that in the book. And I said, well, I don't have one. And he said, well, you need to come up with one so that when we print the book, it's in there. So I was going to use Sacred Pursuit Publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I better do a little Google search on this and make sure I'm not about to create issues.
Right.
And when I did a Google search on Sacred Pursuit, it's used many more times by many different outfits than I ever knew before.
I've never heard of it besides when you and I have done it.
Honestly, I thought it was
about it.
original.
I did too.
I had no idea. There's actually a Sacred Pursuit Outdoors. I don't know if they're still in business or anything, but when I saw that on Instagram, I said, well, I'm not doing that then because, those guys have had this for...
Sure.
But I'll tell you how weird it was. When I saw they had Sacred Pursuit Outdoors, I thought, I'm going to see when they started it. So I went back and looked at their Instagram page, and it preceded my use of it by years.
Yeah.
So I realized that it was not an original idea to have anything under Sacred Pursuit. So I just abandoned that completely, and I had nothing. So I prayed about it, and I talked to other people about it and sought counsel. I have a little formula that I use, if you want to put it that way, anytime I make a major decision. And prayer is part of it, seeking counsel is part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and a great deal of thoughts usually part of it, and nothing. And this went on for weeks and weeks, nothing. And the book was about to be published. And one morning, my daughter asked me if I would meet her with a couple of grandkids at a local park, go with her to watch them while she did something. I don't remember exactly what it was. So I went on babysitting detail. And the park just happened to be where I could see the mountain that we bear hunt on from town.
Yeah.
And I'd been thinking about the mountain and places that are like locally iconic and things to use. And it just remembered the old ladder tree up on top of the mountain. And back years ago, there was a bear hunter that lived here by the name of Carson Landers. He's passed away now. But if you got every bear hunter in our area together and you said, name the 3 toughest bear hunters that you've known your entire life, anybody that didn't bring up Carson Landers would be exposing themselves as a fraud. Because Carson was genuinely legendary, tough as nails. I mean, it was insane, the things that he could do in the mountains. You just wouldn't believe it. How he could get through the country, the numbers of bear he was involved with. It was just wild. And a genuine mountain man. Not only bear hunting, but also deer hunting. I had a cousin one time that was looking for deer sign, and he said he went up this real long creek bed and saw a left-hand holler turn up toward the top of a ridge, and it was loaded with big boulders. And he thought to himself, he said, if I get up across them boulders, I'll be up there where most people won't fool around. So he scratched and crawled and got up there, and he said he got up there and noticed up in the top of two big trees was somebody had taken grapevines and weaved them into a hammock. And he said it was wild to see because it was up in the top of two trees. And he realized somebody had climbed up in those trees and weaved grapevines into a hammock and tied them into the trees.
No kidding.
So,
how high off the ground do you think they were?
I don't know for sure, but 20, 30 feet.
Wow.
And so my cousin comes back out of the mountains, and sometime along there he was talking to Carson. And he was explaining to Carson about finding that grapevine hammock. And Carson said, son, he said, that's mine. And he said, I've been hunting out of that. And he said, you stay out of there. Carson, from what I understand, knew there was a big buck in there, but he was scaring him off in the mornings when he was going into it. So he put that hammock up in the top of them trees and spent the night in it so that he would be there when it got daylight the next morning.
I've thought about doing that before. You know, in deer country, we always walk in early morning and wonder how many deer you scare out of places.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the stories about Carson are basically limitless as you talk to people. And there's a ridge that runs up toward the Appalachian Trail. There's an old road bed that goes right up the middle of the ridge. And just, I don't know, maybe a quarter mile before you get to the Appalachian Trail, there's a chestnut oak there. And it's not a real tall tree because it's high on the mountain. The wind, don't allow that high. And Carson would climb up in it, him and another real well-known bear hunter named Layman Rice, which was a good friend of my grandfather's. They'd go up there and listen for their dogs. Well, Carson got the idea that they would cut boards and put them on there for steps to climb up in the tree. I've got a picture of him in the tree. Got a picture of Layman in the tree. And Hugh Lamb was involved in it. Dolphus Cutchaw, he was a part of that. Several different local bear hunters. And of course, everybody over time has been involved. And one of the things that made it really special to me was I had 3 dogs for several years, and Ben hunted the most, so I don't want to imply that he didn't. But they were mine, and it helped out that they were mine because I could keep him from taking them hog hunting sometimes and losing them. So we had a core to hunt around.
Right.
Yeah. And I had a dog named Crow. It was a good dog. Had a little gyp named 50. She was named 50 because she had half of a tail. Well, we cut it off because it had a crook in it when she was born. And then I had a dog named Gideon.
Yeah.
Well, Crow died of testicular cancer last year before last. No, it was last year early. 50 was killed by a bear. And then Gideon, through crazy circumstances, he got lost over in South Carolina and was never recovered. Just strange circumstances. So all 3 of my dogs are gone. Well, one day back probably 3 or 4 years ago, Ben had to be at work at 3 o'clock. And I told him that particular day, I said, well, take me to the top of the mountain. And no, I drove to the top of the mountain. He went around to North Carolina because that was all that was open. I said, take me. I'll go to the top. I'll walk down because you got to go to work. And so I had those 3 dogs, Crow, 50, and Gideon. I made it probably within 300 yards of the bottom. And hit a red hot track from the very top. I was all the way down.
Right.
And it was red hot. And I turned those 3 dogs loose on it, and it was a really long race. That was about 10 o'clock when I turned them loose. They come back across the top of the mountain into Tennessee and ran over there all day. Finally made their way around to a place we called the Burnt Ridge and got treed right at dark, about 5 to 5:30. I drove up the area there where I could have good signal. I knew they was treed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was dark. And the ridge they were on was real nasty. And there's just no way I was going to go in there in the dark on what they were on and try to navigate it.
Rock or laurel or everything or what?
Cliffs.
Yeah.
Laurel, just sure nastiness.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those places that Ben probably would have navigated for me even in the daylight.
Yeah.
And so the next morning, I called Ben. It was about 5 o'clock. I called him and I told him, I said, they're treed up here on the Burnt Ridge, and but I'm not going to them. And I said, we'll come back up here in the morning. Well, there's a young boy who was hunting with us then. He called me and just more or less begged me to let me go to him. And I wouldn't let him go because he'd never been on it before.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to take responsibility for him getting hurt and me not going.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't let him go. And, the next morning I was up there just before daylight. And it was around, I think it was got daylight there about 6:30, 7 o'clock. And I pulled in just before it got light. When I rolled the window down, I could hear them all 3 hammered down. And of course, they'd been loose since 10 o'clock the day before.
The day before.
Yeah, and they was hammered down, treed still.
Mm-hmm.
And I called Ben. He was a different location. And I said, well, they're treed up here. I said, they got, he said, well, I'll be up there in a minute. Let's go to them. And our hope was that when he got down there that it would jump out and go back into North Carolina and we'd kill it.
Yeah.
So he went into the tree, and it's a long story, and I'll just try to wrap it up, not every detail. But he went into the tree, got on the cliffs, him and another boy. I went at the top of the mountain, went out the Appalachian Trail to get above it. I was hoping to catch it as it crossed and kill it as it come into Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it came out, it was mad, and it just wreaked havoc. I mean, it was a teetotal train wreck. And it finally treed about noon, about 150 yards under the trail.
He'd been sitting up there storing up all that energy.
Oh, boy, he was ticked, boy. He wasn't planning on doing nothing but taking vengeance.
Yeah.
And they finally got him treed again about 12 o'clock. And Ben and the other guy came up from the bottom. I came down from the top. We got the tree there, not too far apart. I actually got there a little bit first, which is like 1 in 1,000 with me and Ben.
Yeah, did Ben have a broke leg?
No.
Was he on crutches?
No, he was in rough country, and I was walking downhill. Yeah.
Ben could outwalk me when he was 13
that's not
years
right.
old.
That is not right. I just told you a lie. I was above the tree, but I didn't go on down to it till he got up from the bottom because I didn't want to jump it out and push it downhill.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the older you get, you can tell the stories how you want to, right?
That's right.
Yeah. and honestly claim you forgot. So we got to the tree there, and there was just nothing we could do about it. The dogs were wrecked, and it was still in Tennessee. Couldn't shoot it.
Yeah.
And we just had to leave it sitting there.
Right.
But by that time, my 3 dogs had been on that since 10 o'clock the next day, and it was afternoon when I pulled them off.
Yeah.
So the ladder tree, I got real good memories of those 3 dogs because that's where I, went and found them treed at and everything. So the whole story of the history of it, my personal experience on that particular day and everything, it just said, hey, I'm going to use the ladder tree.
Yeah. And you've done a good job of laying that all out. And what's your slogan around that? It's where the old men go to listen.
Yeah, where the old men go to listen. Higher ground for listening ears.
There you go. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Higher ground for listening ears, and it ties into exactly what the book is called The Old Men. and I started reading it. And I know you all think you got, old time things cornered, that market cornered down here in the Eastern Mountains, but I haven't read anything in that book that I wasn't taught right there in Southern Indiana. I mean, it's amazing when I read those and I think, yeah, I know what they're talking about. Everything from standing around with your hands in your pockets to the story about your grandpa and you building a fence or doing a job, and you said, well, we could just go to town and buy this, and Papaw was like, your Papaw Barry was like, no, we're going to do it because that's what we got. Heard that 1,000 times. I used to get so mad at Dad. He had a floor covering business, and he'd send my brother and I out there to remove linoleum tile or ceramic tile or whatever, and we'd be in there with chisels, and it's like they make electric jackhammers for this that you could just get that grout and that thin set off this floor and just. Brr, brr. He's like, what do I need that for? I got you two. That's what we got.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, when I wrote the book, I think I even put it in there somewhere that my purpose wasn't for people to read it and try to adopt all the things I was taught. My purpose, in part, was that you would remember what you were taught.
Yeah, and it does that because it all comes back. I mean, if you're raised with any kind of principles at all, that book is going to speak to you. And the thing I really like about it is almost all the stories. I don't think I've read one yet that's more than 3 pages long. So it gets in there, and you've always had a knack for that anyway, Tracy, of being able to, shell that stuff right down to the cob, get it right down there where your people can get it. But you can read 1 or 2 a day and reflect on it the rest of the day. I mean, it's a good book. I'm really happy I got it.
I was really hoping that even people who maybe don't enjoy reading would still be able to work their way through the book.
Yeah.
And not dread it.
I don't think there's anything to dread. I mean, you get to the story, you get to the point, you make it in a couple pages. It takes less time to read that as most Facebook posts, really. I mean, it was masterfully done on that front. So,
well, the hope behind the book is more or less trying to encourage us to recapture manhood and what it means to be a man through the conversations that I had with real men.
Mm-hmm.
Men that, were not perfect. And I don't try to make heroes out of anybody in the book. And there's multiple places where I share their faults and, their backgrounds. And I'm not looking for heroes. What I'm saying is there's a certain way men ought to conduct themselves that makes them men. And in those essays and in those conversations in that book, to me, what I wanted to do was, if there was a boy who was 14 or 15 years old that grew up without a dad, I wanted him to be able to read the book and be taught what other boys are taught with dads.
Mm-hmm. I think you accomplished that. The one chapter I'm thinking of is, can I have a cigarette?
Yeah.
Where your dad, you stated that Dad wasn't perfect. You say that a lot. Not that you're trying to bring cast shade on your dad, but to give him credibility and to let all of us know that none of us are perfect.
Men are just men.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to talk to you about your dad.
It's a good day for it. He passed away 6 years ago today.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, your dad is one of those guys that I just had a real brief time with him. I mean, a few days back, a few years ago, we went up to his house to watch the Cowboys game. I think they were playing who were they playing? They weren't playing the Redskins. They were playing the Eagles, I think, Philadelphia Eagles. I've never rooted for the Cowboys in my life, and I don't think I did very much that night. But at any rate, your dad was just one of those guys that just what am I looking for? I mean, I knew I was in the presence of a real man at that point. Somebody that carried on good conversations. He carried himself in a certain way. There's several things about him that you've told me over the years that have stuck with me, that made impressions on me. I still use that line, "It's all over."
Yep.
He'd get on the radio and hear a shot off in the distance, and you'd hear your dad, Terry, get on the radio and say, "It's all over." And you knew it was all over at that point.
Yep.
And the other one was, "Stay off the radio and you'll catch more bear."
Yeah.
That was the other one.
Talk less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
He hated that.
Yeah.
He just hated to hear people yammer.
I think Terry Jones is probably the greatest bear hunter nobody's ever heard of. The stories I've heard, hearing your Papaw Barry talk about, the pictures I've seen, the way you honor him in the book.
Well, I would say this: Barry Tarleton deserves all the credit he's been given.
Mm-hmm.
But he had such a magnanimous personality and a great deal of charisma that it really overshadowed a lot of what Dad accomplished in his lifetime. If you ask people about Houston Valley plots, everybody's going to know Papaw.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are going to know my cousin Charles because he was very key in Houston Valley plots at a critical juncture.
Yeah.
And a plot historian within himself and an astute breeder. But Dad, nobody would even know he was ever involved.
Yep.
People who know Houston Valley plots would know if they looked at a pedigree, they would know what it meant when it said Tarleton's so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
They would know what it meant if it said Lowry's so-and-so.
Yeah, Charles Lowry.
Or Rocky.
Yep.
And they would know what it meant if it said Ben's so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
But if it says just Jones's so-and-so.
Hector.
Yeah. They wouldn't even know who that came from. They might think of Ira.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because probably the best known plot hunter with the name Jones is Ira.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, but Dad, if I describe Dad in a way that was succinct, I would put it this way. No matter what we were doing, whether it was farming or hunting or anything, whatever it was, whatever the hardest part was, he would be the one that did it. No matter what it was.
He wasn't going to be sitting in the tractor in the cab in the air conditioner while you were pitching bales.
In his older years, he drove the tractor with the air conditioner.
He
was also in his 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had to.
Yeah. But no, if you raise tobacco, and people who hear this who raise tobacco around here will know what I mean. When you lay sticks, you lay those sticks up on your shoulders in a bundle.
Yeah.
And drop them one at a time down through rows.
Right.
It was incredible how many sticks the man could put on his shoulder. I mean, I was a good sized teenage boy. I was pretty stout when I was a teenage boy. But and he would go. He went shirtless all the time. When you look at old pictures of us, you'd think we didn't own shirts.
Yeah.
And he would put those big old stacks of sticks up on his shoulders and go down through those rows laying those sticks just like it was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was 5 tiers in a barn, he would be on the highest tier.
He'd be on the 5th one, fighting the wasps and everything else.
He was born in 47. Here, I think he was actually born in Washington County on that side of the line. He was raised up in a community called Greystone, which he was very proud of. And when he was 2, his dad just forsook the family and moved up north. So it left my grandmother to raise 4 kids. Dad was the youngest. Mm-hmm. She had an older boy, 2 daughters in the middle, then Dad. And Dad was 2 years old when his dad just left. He didn't come back till I was like, I was probably 10 years old before he ever come back down this country.
Really?
Yep. And we don't know why. I asked my grandmother one time, I said, why did he leave? And she said, if you want to know, you'll have to ask him. She never would say.
Yeah.
Never said. Never had a bad word to speak against him. Just he was gone, and it's all we knew.
Yeah.
So growing up without a dad then is different than growing up without a dad now, because now there's no stigma.
It's kind of normal.
It is normalized.
Unfortunately.
Then, if you had a single woman, you know, there was a stigma that went with that, right or wrong, and the children had a stigma attached to them, made it tough. But in the community that Dad lived, family and friends really made a difference, especially old men.
Yeah.
And he talked about them often. I always about them farming and the meals that the women would cook when they farmed. You know,
Yeah.
they didn't have an overabundance of groceries. He would talk about going down to the local store, which you'd have to either ride or walk or ride a horse. He'd go down there and sing for a nickel or a dime so he could get a sandwich and a drink.
He would sing?
He would sing. Yep. Yep, he loved country music. He was a George Jones man.
Was he?
Yeah. Yeah, he loved George.
The possum.
The possum. Yep.
Yeah.
He sure did.
What was his favorite George Jones song?
Wow. I don't know what his favorite song
Yeah.
would have been. I'm not sure. I would say He Stopped Loving Her Today would have to be
I was going to
high
say
on
that.
the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I drive the truck he owned when he passed away. It's still the farm truck. I have it. And there's a George Jones gospel CD, which he switched over to the gospel side later.
Yeah.
So he didn't switch singers; he just switched genres.
Oh.
So he loved horses his mama's side of the family their last name was Reeves, and they were horse people, the whole clan.
Yeah.
And Dad, that was always his favorite animal. And he would comment often and say, the horse is responsible for the advancements of the world or something along those lines. You know, he loved a horse.
Yeah.
He's one of the few people I've ever been around that could literally just stand and rub a horse or brush a horse just for his own enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
He enjoyed it as much as the horse did.
Yeah.
And to ride, to have them, I mean, he loved a horse. So he went to Vietnam. He was there in 67 and 68. And he would joke and say that he got that as a high school senior trip.
Yeah. My senior trip. Yeah.
He got drafted. And I asked him one time what the Vietnam War was all about. He just paused and looked at me and he said, I really don't know. He said, let me know what you find out.
But he served. He served honorably. He was an artilleryman, right?
He was like a lot of poor kids, you know, whether they were from the Appalachians or from the ghetto, you know. And I've often found that Appalachian people have a lot in common with inner city blacks in reference to how they're viewed and how they're treated and how they view the government in return. A lot of similarities between inner city blacks and Appalachian folks.
It's interesting.
Yep. So, and their worship in a Baptist church is real similar.
Mm-hmm.
So, he told me, and of course, I'm not a Vietnam expert. I don't know all the names, the terminologies. Anybody who listens to this, who was there, who knows all the details, will probably be able to pick holes in my recollection of his limited stories, because he just never discussed it. Mm-hmm. You would never know Dad was in Vietnam or knew he was a police officer, except for just seeing him put his uniform on. He just never talked about it. He worked all the time, and he didn't talk much, period. So I would just have to pick up bits and pieces over the years. Well, one time, for some reason, I was looking through my parents' dresser drawer. I'm not sure what I was even looking for. And I found medals. And there was little small boxes with lids on them, and they had medals in them. Mm-hmm. I'd never heard of them. I didn't know they were there.
Right.
And he had never mentioned anything. We had several. And one of them I know was a Purple Heart. And he did tell me that he got that. He was in the infantry, but they were doing something one day, and he got hit with some kind of grenade booby trap. The grenade, there was a booby trap, had a grenade in it, went off, and shrapnel caught him in the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And they medevaced him out, put him on a helicopter, and flew him out. And he said that he thought, just my luck, I'm one of the first people in my outfit to get hammered. Well, a couple of weeks later, he found out that after he got medevaced out, they got crushed. So what seemed to be unlucky was blessed.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I get a little emotional about this, but I didn't know this until about a year ago. Dad had an aunt that was a godly Christian woman.
Yeah.
Dad was wild, buck wild.
Yeah.
And she was concerned he would get killed in Vietnam.
And he wouldn't be saved.
Yes.
She prayed over him every day, didn't she?
My cousin, one of Dad's best friends, one of his female cousins, told me about a year ago, the aunt's name was Pearl. She said many times she would see Aunt Pearl on the floor, on her knees. And she said she would pray over and over and over. God save the boy, but take me. God save the boy.
Wow. And that's a cousin. A cousin to your dad?
Dad's cousin saw their mutual aunt praying for him.
So was that your mom's sister then or something?
No, it was
the only reason I ask, I'm just trying to figure, that's tight-knit family, and that's one of those things that comes from the things that I see in your book and just the culture of this area, and I hate to see it degrading. We were very much the same, and a lot of the people from my family, they migrated up from the mountains, and some of them came from Ohio. Some of that side did, but family was tight. We knew our family, and we knew our cousins, and we knew our great aunts and our great uncles, and we saw them on Sundays, and we're just we're losing some of that. And when I read your book, I see you talking about the old men and the customs and the culture and stuff like that. So it's very, very refreshing to see it.
Well, I asked Dad one time, I said, were you afraid that you wouldn't make it home? He said, no. He said, it never once crossed my mind I wouldn't make it home.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you go through combat duty in Vietnam? And Dad wasn't an exaggerator or a liar.
Right.
And when he said, it never once crossed my mind, with other people that you would question that. But with Dad, he that was literal. He just never bothered him. There was no thought in his mind he wouldn't come home. But I relate it back to Aunt Pearl's prayers.
Mm-hmm.
She had him covered.
I think some of that is it's amazing that your dad had that attitude, but when you're in that situation, if you start thinking like that, I may not make it home, then you're combat ineffective at that point.
I see.
So you have to have that attitude. Plus you're 18 to 22 years old, and who doesn't think they're bulletproof at that age, But it's a great mindset to have.
I don't know the geography very well, but I know some of the things he told me. He was in Da Nang and Hue and Chu Lai. Those are the three places I can remember.
Yeah. All three of those places had big operations, big battles. So
he makes it home.
Hue City for sure.
Yeah. He makes it home from Vietnam, and buys a 67 or 68 Pontiac GTO because he loves speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he would talk about it having 3 deuces.
Yeah.
And a beautiful car. We got a couple pictures of it, man. It's fantastic. Met Mom at I think like a drive-in restaurant. And they marry in December of '69. So he gets in the family. He's scared to death of Papaw. He would tell you that.
Would he tell you that?
Oh yeah,
Really?
yeah. He would tell you he was scared of him. Papaw was a heck of a man, and
Yeah.
you know, Dad comes home from Vietnam and scared of his father-in-law. And in fact, Ben asked Dad one day. He said Ben called him Granddad. He said, Granddad. He said all those moonshiners hated Papaw. He said, why didn't they kill him? And he said, well, son, I guess they afraid they wouldn't get the job done. And because you know that was how much respect Dad had for Papaw.
It seems to me that this is the ideal place to talk to you about Cajun lights. Cajun lights are strong enough, dependable enough to do any job that you need a light to do for you. But I can tell you that L.W. Nixon's customer service ain't going to cover Mr. Green Jeans taking your light. There's all kinds of options at Cajun Lights. They've got the micro gator all the way up to the brand new blinder. You need to check all of them out over at Cajun Lights. You can do that by going to HoundsmanXP.com. They're in our shop, and you can order a Cajun light right from our shop at HoundsmanXP.com. When you absolutely need the best, check out Cajun Lights. You won't be disappointed. The Houndsman XP podcast only endorses products that we would use ourselves, and I do use Elite Nutrition supplements. Elite Nutrition offers supplements for your horses, your mules, your dogs, and even you. These all-natural products work with your dog's natural immune system and its normal, natural body function, not to treat symptoms, but to fix problems. Stop pumping pharmaceutical toxins into yourself or your dogs and start using these all-natural products that work with the perfect system that God gave you. Go to tryelitenutrition.com and check out their products for wound care, prebiotic, probiotic, puppy stuff. It's all there. Parasite control. If you expect extreme performance, you need Elite Nutrition.
That was rough. I mean, people love to tell me stories, you know, about it. And it don't bother me one bit because, I mean, when you're a preacher, everybody wants to sort of sanitize everything for you because they're not sure how you will take it. But I don't like it sanitized because if your goal in life is to want young men to become Christian men, to me, you have to be a man to be a Christian man. And there are some people who have faith, but they're not much of a man. And there are some people that are mighty men that don't have any faith.
Right.
And the rare combination of the man who's both Christian and man is rare. And sometimes it takes a lot of man building before you can make a Christian man out of him.
Well, your dad didn't come to faith until later on in life, correct?
Years.
Yeah.
I would say around 50. I calculated it up when I wrote the book, and I think it's in the book about the right age, and it was around 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had gotten saved, and of course I wanted to make sure my dad was saved, but I was afraid of Dad. I don't mean afraid he would beat me up, but I mean, you know, Dad wasn't a prankster.
Yeah.
And you didn't never exactly know quite how he would view something. Now, Papaw and I were very much alike, and pretty much the way I would view something would be the way he would view it.
Yeah.
But Dad, not so much. Ben and Dad are a lot alike. And I've told
I'm picking up on that.
I told Martha in Montana, I said, Ben wasn't raised around Dad when he was growing up as a little kid. And I said, I don't know how Ben could be so much like Dad and not be around him. I mean, it's literally like raising my dad.
Well, Ben loves horses.
Yep.
Ben loves to bear hunt.
Yep.
Ben's tough.
Tough.
Yep.
A lot of like. And so I remember the exact day that I talked to my dad about his salvation. And he had some kind of story about some profession of faith he had made when he was young.
Mm-hmm.
And but when he actually got saved, I was going to college, and I'd come in for the weekend, and a local church nearby was having a special meeting, and him and Mom went with me to that special meeting, and Dad got saved that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that church, and he never looked back.
And that's when you were in college?
Yep. Yeah, I was in college when he got saved. And he ended up getting in a good church, loved it, loved his Bible. He was the easiest man I ever had any role in discipling. Because if you could show it to him in the scriptures, there was no more questions. Nope.
That's a lot of times that's my problem is I start reading stuff and then I try to overthink it instead of just taking it at face value of what it is.
Yeah, when he won the sheriff's election, I was still in Bible college. He asked me, he said, what does the Bible say about being sheriff? So I found places in the scripture that had to do with government.
Yeah.
And the role of government. And I explained it to him. That was it. There was no more.
No problem.
Nope. Well, if that's what it says, that's good.
Well, what kind of bear hunter was he?
Well,
are you getting to that?
Yeah, he married into the family. And
I don't mean to overshadow any of the rest of it. I just want to make sure that we were going to get to that.
Well, I wanted to go the long way around the bush because I think it's important to know what kind of man a fella is.
I think you're right, and I'm lucky because you and I have talked about your dad a lot, but I'm still learning a bunch of stuff here, and it's amazing.
Well, like I said, whatever was the hard part to be done, he would be doing the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
And when he first started bear hunting with my grandpa, I would have been too young to really have paid much attention because that would have been very early 70s.
Before we get there, I'm going to back up. I'm going to be the one to back up. How many terms as sheriff did he run?
He was, when he first got into law enforcement, he was a jailer.
Yeah.
Then he became head jailer. Then he got on the road as a deputy.
Mm-hmm.
Then he made sergeant. Then he made lieutenant. Then he won the sheriff's election for one term.
Okay.
Got beat the next time he run and went back to the road.
So how many years did he spend in law enforcement total?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know the total number of years.
There's still got to be several years there.
There's a long time. Yeah.
20,
25, 30. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So he was well respected in the community, to win the sheriff's election, because Greene County's a pretty big county.
When he died, it was unbelievable at the funeral the county put on for him. It was insane. I mean, they had cranes with flags hanging over the roads, and
the
entire sheriff's department showed up. The military was there. They did what do they call it? The last call.
Yeah. Yep. On the radio.
On the radio.
Yep.
And
that's eerie.
It's eerie. Of course, we blew the horn.
Mm-hmm.
If the listeners don't know what I'm talking about, in our family,
the dog horns.
Yes, the dog horn. In our family, when a hound hunter dies, the last thing we do at the funeral is blow the horn symbolically to call their dogs in.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Well, we've talked about all the rest of it, a lot of it. We can't tell the whole story in one podcast, Life of Terry Jones. But
so he marries into the family of Barry Tarleton.
Yeah.
That's how the bear hunting comes about.
Did he bear hunt before then?
No.
Okay.
Well, see, he just come back from Vietnam. He grew up without a dad. He would have hunted rabbits and different things when he was a kid with different people, but he wasn't a hunter, really growing up much.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually even have to probably ask some of my cousins, that are older, what Dad did about hunting when he was a kid. I know he squirrel hunted some because he talked about an uncle that had a squirrel dog.
Yeah.
He had a 20 gauge single shot shotgun that Mom bought back from a guy. It was his first gun. We still got it. So he marries into the family. Papa's obviously bear hunting. Dad joins in, becomes an integral part of it. And that's why you bring up about being the unknown.
Yeah.
And I wrote about that on Facebook this morning, memory of Dad, because 6 years ago, he passed away. He's probably the least known of the significant contributors to the Houston Valley line of dogs.
The whole thing, the reason we're sitting here talking is totally by chance.
Yep.
I was going to meet another person to do a podcast today, and I was down in this part of the country, and we had some problems hooking up. And so instead of wasting a 5 or 6 hour trip today, I just picked up the phone and I called you. On the 6-year anniversary of your dad's death, I haven't looked at Facebook today. Mm-hmm. I've been on the road since 6 o'clock this morning. Didn't even see that post. And I told you, I said, yeah, let's do one about your dad and the greatest bear hunter nobody ever heard of.
See, I thought you had seen the post when you mentioned that. No, well, that's interesting. Yeah.
I have not seen that post today.
Yep. Well, I described him basically that way, within our family. Dad didn't like a lot of dogs. He loved dogs, but he didn't like to keep more than one. Mm-hmm. And at the most, he would have 2. And that was, man, I can only think of one time when he had 2. He was a one-dog man, because younger hunters won't, I don't know if they will relate to this, but in the 70s through some parts of the 80s, the bear population was real low. Mm-hmm. And you could hunt for several days and not find a track. So when you found a track, you could not mess it up. I mean, if you found a track every 5 days and you mess that up, you don't know when you're getting the next track to run.
Right.
So the standard procedure in that time period was when you left the truck, you took one dog. And the people going out to look for a track were not just walking trails. They knew where grapevines were. They knew where oak flats were. They knew specific places on the sides and in the hollers of these mountains to go check.
Yeah.
So they would go in deep to see if they could find anything. And once they found it, a lot of times they'd leave the dog on a leash till they jumped the bear. It'd turn him loose. Mm-hmm. Because they would track him through feeding grounds, they would call them. They'd call out on those old radios, crackling, poppling, and buzzing and whizzing, and truck drivers in the background, and it'd say, I've got one found here, but he's in a feeding ground. That was real common. And he's going in circles, and he's down off of this side. I'll call you back if I get it straightened out.
And the whole time they had the dog on the leash.
On the leash. Yep. Would not turn it loose. So they'd track that thing until then they might holler back and say, I've got it straightened out here, which meant they got out of the feeding ground where he'd fed the night before and the bear was going straight away. A lot of times to water where he was headed.
Right.
But it just meant he was moving away from me, and we're good to turn loose now. Mm-hmm. So wherever he was at, there'd be 5 or 6 people now take 2 or 3 dogs apiece and go to him.
Well, I kind of saw some of that the first time I hunted with you down here, because Rocky was out walking. You had guys out walking through the mountains. We didn't know where we were going, so Ben was with me, and we were just kind of, and I was hunting with you some. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that they were keeping the dogs on leash until they got the track sorted out.
Yeah, that was common. Very common.
And then these mountains, keeping the dog on leash with the laurel and everything.
Brutal.
It's also a challenge.
Yeah, brutal.
Yeah.
And this will aggravate some folks, but I'll say it. A lot of people are turning dogs loose now on tracks that they're thinking that those dogs straighten out. And what's happening is those dogs are there's just enough bear now that they're yipping around until they hit something hot.
You're right.
Yeah, I'm right.
Yeah.
So back then, you couldn't take a chance on a dog, trailing around until he bumped something hot. You literally had to jump that particular bear.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was not another one to accidentally run across, maybe.
Yeah.
So they would get it straightened out. You take the dogs into them, and then the standard ideology would be to turn the dog loose that you'd found the bear with and let it go out of hearing. No tracking collars, no GPSs, no telemetry, leather collar, and a nameplate. And when the first dog went out of hearing, you'd cut another one loose. And when that one was almost out of hearing, you'd cut another one loose. You were trying to time it so the front dog would actually get the bear up out of its bed by the time the other dogs caught up to him. You don't want a chance on a dog without much of a nose overrunning the dog that could find the thing.
Mm-hmm. Trying to see explain how that would work. The first dog is going to be moving slower because he's sorting the track out and trying to get to that bed. So he's going to be traveling slower. The other dogs you're turning loose are going to that dog, trying to catch up to that dog.
That's right.
And they're believe it or not, and that's why we see dogs babbling and stuff like that. I've seen enough of it. Dogs will track other dogs. Some dogs will strike on other dogs too.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that. The dog will cross a road, and if all you do is rig and you never get out and free cast a dog, as soon as you get to wherever a dog is crossed the road, whether I've seen it where they haven't been running a bear across the road, they just came out to the road, and I see them cross. They're lost. They dropped out of the race, and you get to that point, and a dog will strike.
I left to go to college in 91. Moved to Montana in 98. Moved back here in 2007. And the thing that surprised me most was people leaving the truck with multiple dogs.
What were the timeline? You got back here in 2007.
And the thing that surprised me most was people getting out of their truck to go bear hunting with multiple dogs. Because the bear population had increased so much in the time frame that I had been gone that they could just simply walk out a trail and count on finding 2 or 3 bear a day. They didn't have to worry about just getting that one bear up. They could take every dog they had and turn them loose right away.
Yeah.
More tracks, hotter tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So it was different.
I can't believe that the first time I ever talked to you on the phone was prior to 2007. That was 17 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this Sunday's the 17th anniversary of this church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so Dad's thing was he loved to find the tracks. That's what he wanted to do.
Because it was hard. It's hard.
It's hard work.
It is hard work, for sure.
Yep. If you get in these mountains, just trying to walk in them's hard enough with nothing. But trying to lead a dog and watch the track, walk it out, know which way it's going, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I know people write everything about dogs going the wrong way and all this kind of stuff. I can't say what other people do and don't really care. I just know how it worked here. Mm-hmm. And that's how it worked. But he loved it. And so he would get, and then once it was loose, I'm not quite sure how to put this, but Dad's objective was not just to have his dogs running a bear the way some houndsmen would be. He wasn't necessarily interested in the experience. He was interested in killing the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Papaw could be perfectly happy turning loose, the dog's running all day, not catching the bear, maybe, catching his dogs up and still having enjoyed the race.
Dad had a good day, but if your dad didn't kill the bear, it wasn't a good day.
No, that's why he went.
I'm more like Papaw because I've said that before. I like watching dogs. I like watching dogs work. So was your dad more of like totally utilitarian with the dog. That dog is a tool. It's just like the rifle.
No, he was probably had a closer relationship to his dog than Papaw had to any of his.
Really?
His dog was personal to him because
Mm-hmm.
he usually just had one.
Right.
They say you're not supposed to give dogs chocolate, but Dad always carried a chocolate bar for him and for his dog in his old army jacket.
Huh.
And he had a personal belief that some people could dismiss maybe, but it was real to him. He believed when you were getting a pup going that it was extremely important for them to drink bear blood. He knocked a bear out, and there was young dogs around. He was cutting that thing and letting them drink. He believed that when they drank that blood, that was good for them. And he had a story he would tell about a dog of his that got real bad hurt one day on a bear. The Hector dog was real bad about grabbing a bear by the head. And he said the dog was just about gone, but he cut the bear open and let him drink its blood, and he said it saved the dog's life. And he believed that that revived that dog and kept that dog from fading out. So that was a sort of a little unusual twist, that Dad held. And no, the dogs were not utilitarian to him. He was good to animals. Now, he wasn't no animal rightist type person.
Right.
But he liked his animals. He always took anything he had, he took good care of. Carried a candy bar, in his pocket just for his dog. They got one, he got one. And he stayed out of the vehicle. He's, where we hunt, there's a necessity for good truck men.
Yeah.
And a good truck man can save your bacon and your dogs.
But it doesn't work if everybody wants to be the truck man.
No. and there's so I'm not saying there's not a need for good truck men, but the people who actually bear hunt are not usually in the road.
Exactly.
So
how many days would you go up on the mountain though, and your dad would be? The action could be, because these mountains are challenging. Without the mountain laurel, they'd be challenging. But once those dogs get out away from you, and how many times would y'all kill a bear way away from him and still not see him until dark because he was way back in the mountains?
Often you didn't see him all day. That I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, my papa and mama, and I would have told you when I was a kid I was much closer to my grandpa than my dad because Dad worked all the time. So my personal time was almost always with my grandpa, and many times I would be in the truck with my grandpa and we would go up on the mountain to bear hunt. We wouldn't even know where Dad was at. In fact, wouldn't even know if he was there that day.
Really?
Yeah. Somebody'd find a bear, turn loose on it, and, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, the radio would start popping and cracking, and it's always the same thing. It's, how about it, Barry? Just low key, like nothing. Just, how about it, Barry?
Yeah.
And Papa, man, he'd pop up off of that seat, glowing. Go ahead, Terry. And he'd say, it's all over.
It's all over.
Yeah. You'd hear the dogs whining in the background.
Huh. Drinking bear blood.
Yeah. Chewing on the bear, whining. It's just all over. You wouldn't even know he was there. Because he wasn't going to be on the radio all the time, He didn't talk a lot, period.
Right.
And so that was a common thing for him to be where he ought to be. And it was sort of weird, too, that he had... he could be on the front end of things and find it, then somehow also end up on the finishing end of it so often.
Yeah. Yeah, I know he traveled a lot to hunt too, or he traveled a few times
Canada.
to hunt. Yeah, he would go to Canada. Yeah. Did you all take him to, do you have lease in South Carolina or North Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Didn't he make a trip or two over there with you?
The last bear hunting trip he ever took was down on the coast with us, and Dad got a disease called scleroderma, and it's called the disease that turns your organs to stone. And it can pick any particular organ, but with him it was his esophagus, and it killed it. It just killed his esophagus. So he couldn't hold food down, and he was basically starving to death. But we didn't know the extent of how bad he was. He made this trip with us down on the coast. And Dad wasn't easy on me growing up, you know. I mean, he was 100% anti-pansy.
Right.
He wasn't one of these macho type guys.
He was a sincere guy.
Yeah. He was never into the I'm a he-man macho type nonsense.
Yeah.
You know. But he didn't like foolishness, whining, carrying on.
Right.
Well, he kept complaining while we were down there hunting. He kept telling me how bad his stomach was bothering him. And I regret it now, but at the time it irritated me because we was down there to bear hunt, and we'd paid a lot of money for that lease.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't just join a lease, we leased it. You know how expensive that is.
Yeah.
And we'd get up in the mornings, and he wouldn't hunt without eating breakfast. He was insane about breakfast. And the motel didn't have breakfast, so you had to stop somewhere for him. And he'd say, "Man, I'm going to eat breakfast before I go." "All right, Dad, we're going to have to leave earlier to get from here over to where we're hunting in, so you can get breakfast." And then his stomach would be killing him. Man, I got so irritated. I was like, "Dude, I wish you'd just stop whining. I mean,
yeah,
we're trying to hunt, you know." And well, finally he told me one day, he said, "I'm going home." He said, "Something's not right, and I'm leaving." Well, at that point I realized this isn't just an old man with a backache. He got home, found out his stomach was, part of his stomach was dead. They had to cut about a foot out of it. Staple it back up. But while we were there on his last hunt, it's really indicative of sort of the way he functioned. We had turned loose on a big bear. It had crossed a sandy road and got on a farm that was not a part of our lease. But I had the phone number to the guy who owned the farm, and I called him. Told him, you know, I had the lease across the road from him, and I'd been given his number, and dogs had crossed the road, and he had told me previous to that we would work something out if we had trouble. And he said, "Okay, how big do you think it is?" And I said, "This is a big bear." He said, "Go ahead, go get it." So we had permission, and the bear's bayed up like 150, 200 yards from this sandy road, and I mean, it is on like Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
I mean, like hair raising on. Boys are trying to slide in there to kill it, get into it, and everything. And I mean, it's a roar. And well, Dad is up the road about 100 yards yelling something. I don't know what he's yelling. Ben hears him yell, carrying on. He's mad about something. We're engrossed in this bear fight right here beside of us. I mean, it's what you live for taking place. And he's up there mad, yelling, screaming about something. Totally frustrated, like Nick Saban on the sideline when they kicked one wide right. And, well, after we get this bear killed, Dad finally tells us, he said, "There's a track right here crossing the road." He said, "I wanted dogs to turn loose." He said, "This is a big bear going the other way. I was trying to get y'all to bring me dogs." Ben said, "Granddaddy, we just killed this big monster bear right here." He said, "Yeah." And he said, "If you'd have listened, we'd have killed two."
Oh man.
But see, he'd found a track.
Yeah.
We were totally engrossed in the bay up, but he had found a track.
Yeah.
Well, that was back to his glory days. He was the man. He had found this big bear. He wanted dogs.
Sure. That's amazing. That's a good story. Good story with a good punchline. Good ending to that story. Well, that's why you wrote the book, Old Men. You know, it's like, yeah, if you'd brought me dogs, we'd have killed two.
Yeah, killed two.
Well, there's so many things that if you look at the book, if you get the book and read it, you're going to get an insight to Terry Jones, and everything from how he taught you to deal with bullies.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a bully at school, I'm going to whip you. If you get bullied at school and you don't stand up to him, I'm going to whip you.
Yeah.
And I actually told my girls, we homeschooled for most of their school, but they went to school for a couple years in the beginning. Jake was a couple years behind. But when Cora went to school, Cora, you could send her in a laurel thicket with a hickory switch to fight a bear. She's mean and tough. But I told them both, I said, if I have to come to school for one of you fighting, I better not come to school and only find one of you been fighting.
Yeah.
This is a team sport for you girls, and that's what I expected. And not that they were mean or going to be in fights, but I didn't want Emma standing back watching her little sister, and I didn't want Cora standing back watching her big sister getting a scrap without getting in the middle of it. And they are so tight today; they're best friends. So those kind of things that I read in your book just really spoke to me, and that's what we were told too. I grew up in a family of 6, and the only thing more dangerous than finding one of us is like trying to break up a fight between all of us. We were rough on each other.
That older generation, they had a code of respect. And there was things that if you crossed the line with them, it was automatic fight. And it's been hard for me to see some of the transition. I'll give you an example. When I was a boy, one of my earliest memories of Dad, of course, I was born in 70, and we were in a 74 Pontiac Le Mans when this happened. So I'm young.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming down the 107 cutoff over here near where I live, down that highway, and met a guy, and for whatever reason, I don't even think Dad knew the guy. Just for whatever reason, the guy was being a smart aleck and shot Daddy a birdie. Well, in that generation, that birdie was literal to them. That meant something to them.
Yeah.
Now people take their pictures shooting each other birdies. It's a joke.
Right.
Well, Dad's generation, somebody got their butt kicked over that.
It meant something.
Yes, sir. They took it literal. You didn't shoot somebody a birdie, and you never called somebody, what they would call an SOB.
Yeah.
Because that was about their mama. Either of them two right there, somebody was either walking away with their tail between their legs or somebody was getting whooped.
Yeah.
So we're going down the road, and this guy shoots Dad a birdie. Well, he turned the car around the middle of the road. I was just a kid in the car with him. We chased that guy everywhere. Dad was flipped. I mean, like a bulldog with his eyes rolled back in the back of his head. We chased that man all over this place. Finally, he got away from us somewhere. I don't know if Daddy finally got his wits about him and realized he had a kid in the car or whatever. Yeah. But that was just, to Dad, when he shot that birdie, at that point right there, somebody had to either drive away with their tail between their legs or take a whipping.
Somebody needed to be held accountable.
Yep. And it was going to happen immediately. I mean,
yeah.
If he, tried to get him cornered, even when he was older, and I mean, I'd say he was in his 50s. I wasn't there because I don't care much for golf, and I was probably in Montana. He had my younger cousin over at the golf course. They were golfing.
Nobody was shooting birdies that day, were they?
No, but I think Dad was probably in his late 50s, coming early 60. And my cousin was a teenager, and he told me that there was a guy on the golf course started rednecking an old man, which was older than Dad, and him coming early 60s, and just wouldn't let up. And finally, this guy rednecking this old man made some kind of advance to him, and Daddy whipped that guy on the golf course.
What was he doing? What do you mean by rednecking an old man? Just
hollering,
being
yelling
disrespectful?
at him, being disrespectful. And then I guess he was going to come over and rough him up, and Daddy, I wasn't there to see it, so right. I don't know all that happened, but he dealt with him on the golf course. And
Yeah.
he wasn't a troublemaker, but he just
He's a problem solver.
he was going to respect you, and he was going to be respected.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's your tell us your favorite bear hunting story or memory of your dad?
I don't know what that would be.
Well, I think you've summed it up. I mean, he was just a quiet guy that hunted hard and did it with one dog and did it the hardest way he could.
He would tell me. I'll tell you a story here in just a second. It's in the book, but I think it's a good story. He would tell me all the time. He would say, "You can't kill bear by being where they're at. You got to kill bear by being where they're going." And other people would hear them bait up and try to get to where they were bait up. Dad would try to anticipate where they would go when the bay busted.
broke. Yeah.
So there's no Garmins. You just had to stay in earshot of them and sort of know where they would cross and the angles they would take. And a lot of the old men understood the country. And it's not 100% effective, but it was, the men who understood the country and how the bear run and where the gaps were and that kind of thing could be in better places.
Mm-hmm.
So he would say that. Of course, he always said, stay off the radio. We were running late one morning, and this time I was with Dad, which was odd because I was usually with my grandpa. But I was with Dad, and we were coming late. Of course, if you were grandpa, you wouldn't be late.
Because he was always 15 minutes
yes,
early.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yep.
And we were coming late. They'd already turned loose on a bear up here on what we call Green Mountain. It was coming down off the side toward the Green Mountain Road, headed lower. And it's headed toward the main road. Dad loved Broncos, like the 68 to like 75, I think it is, right in there.
Those little square body, the ones that are trying to, do the retro model now on.
Yeah. He had 3 74s at different times.
Really?
Yep. And he had a 74 Bronco. And we were coming around the side of the mountain there, and one of the old guys we bear hunted with said, "Boys," he said, "don't pay any attention to those dogs." He said, "They're running the deer. I've seen it. Just don't do it." Dad told me, he said, let's see if they are or not. We went on around, caught another little road that cut off down in below where they would cross next.
Mm-hmm.
And we got in below them. They was coming down a ridge, and he told me, he said, I was just a little kid. He said, "You take the rifle and run down the road to where the creek crosses." He said, "That bear will probably come down and cross there at that creek." And he said, "You can kill it when it crosses the road." And of course, when I say shooting in the road, I don't mean an illegal type thing. And this is a true mountain road, no people, no houses.
Yeah.
And so I grab a rifle, take off running down the road. I might have made it 50 yards, and I heard kaboom. I turned around and looked, and there stood Dad in the road with a bear at his feet. He'd killed it with a pistol. And what had happened, I think, is when I took off running down the road, the bear was on the ridge and saw me.
Yeah.
Cut
back
behind me.
Yeah.
And when he cut behind me, he ran into death. He'd have been much safer if he'd run across in front of me.
Yeah.
So Dad killed him there with a pistol. But that was just sort of indicative of him. It wasn't that he didn't trust the other old guy. It was that intuitively he understood that you can see lots of things in the mountains that the dogs ain't after.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Look for yourself.
Yeah, look for yourself. Find out. Make sure. Don't
Yep.
well, it's a dead bear. He killed it right there in the road. And so I remember that. And then, a lot of other stories that I, probably wouldn't tell on a podcast.
Well, okay, let's wrap it up. Tell me one of the things tell me something that you would like for everybody to know about your dad.
Well, can I intertwine the book and Dad together on
You bet.
that deal there? The disease that Dad got scleroderma was a horrifically horrible death. And you have to understand that as a pastor, I'm around dying people on a regular basis. I see a lot of suffering and a lot of death because people want their preacher with them when they're about to go out.
Mm-hmm.
And through that experience, you see a lot about the way people die. Well, if you have a massive heart attack after living a good life, you're forcing it.
Right.
I watched Dad die, and it was horrible. It drug out and on and on and on. He basically starved to death over a process of time. And within days of him passing away, he was so weak he couldn't hardly move, and he got real small. He always had big, old, massive bear paw hands and huge forearms.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first he was trying to hook a baler up to a tractor one day before he died, and he couldn't lift the shaft up to hook it to the PTO.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him, and I just walked over, reached down, got the PTO, picked it up, put it on the tractor, and just walked off. I couldn't even stand to look at him. And he didn't say nothing. I didn't say nothing. But there, when he was dying, Mom was taking care of him, and he needed to go to the restroom. And she said he insisted on standing up to pee. And she said, Terry, she said, why don't you just sit down on the toilet? She said, it's fine. You can't even stand up. He said, no. He said, men don't sit down to pee. He wouldn't do it. I mean, the man was in teetotal agony, suffering. He actually was asking the Lord to take him on. But in his mind, he had lived as a man.
Yeah.
He was not going to die sitting on that toilet. And we really need, in our generation, to help these young people to understand that we need old men to help young men to become men. And that takes place through the conversations that you have with them and the life you live with them. One generation helps the next generation. And we need men. And obviously,
but not just men that fit the bill because God built them that way, but men that know how to be men. We've done. Can we get there? Are there any left? That can accomplish this mission. It seems like the man in our culture has been neutered. We're too rough. We're not. We need to be nicer. You need to, if you talk mean to me, you need to go to counseling, or I'm gonna divorce you, or And I'm not saying we need to be mean, but be a man.
I think about this all the time. As a pastor, I do counseling with people, and I'm not making light of anybody's legit troubles. But I've never seen so many people in my life that complain about being, quote, stressed out. No generation in the history of mankind has had it so easy.
Yeah.
We have every luxury there is. The poorest people in America are better off than some of the richest people in world history.
Yeah.
And we're stressed. And that idea of being stressed out and I've got to have this to make it, and I got to take this, and I got to jack myself up on this, and all that kind of stuff, man. Them old men, they didn't even think in those terms. I never heard, Dad or Papa carry on with some of the stuff that I have to deal with today, and it wasn't in our vocabulary. I don't know how to even explain it. I didn't know any of that stuff existed because I didn't grow up in that world. The men I grew up with, they didn't talk in those terms or live in those terms. I don't even think they knew the concept of that. They just knew life had to be lived, and you lived it.
Yeah. You know, I read something. It's been a few years ago now, but if you make $15,000, no, I'm sorry, it's 20,000. If you make $20,000 a year or more, you're in the top 3% of the world in wealth.
Yeah.
In the top 3% of the wealthiest people in the world. Just to prove your point about how we've got it in this country. But you know, my question was, and I know we've talked about, and the reason it was a loaded question because we've talked about this a lot. I feel like men deserve to be. When we see real men, they need to be celebrated.
Yep.
And we have done a very good job in our culture of villainizing those men. God created us different than women, for sure.
Absolutely.
In more ways than just physical. Our mentality, and we've been told through the last few generations that we need to be nicer. We need to be, you know, there's a time to be rough, and there's a time that the world needs rough men that aren't afraid to stand up and be rough. And there's a whole lot of these younger guys growing up that have misunderstood what that actually means and aren't prepared to do what they need to do in rough times.
Well, the only reason any nice people have the luxury of being nice is because they're surrounded by enough people who can get dirty
Yeah.
to give them that luxury.
Sure.
That's it. That's factual.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not picking on any religions, but some of these religions that are totally passive, that don't believe any kind of roughhouse, any kind of fighting, or any kind of combat, they can't live that way unless they're surrounded by people who disagree with them. Because they would just simply be, in most of world history, they'd just be annihilated.
That's a good point.
And they would be subjected by some group
Right.
that disagreed with them.
Right.
So the luxury of that, and of course, we're not talking about rudeness and crassness
Right.
and meanness.
We're just talking about keeping your word, having principles, you know, being loyal to your family. If you say you're going to do something, do it. You know, things like that.
You ask, and I want to make sure we go back. You ask, are there any left? And this is a hound podcast, a dog hunter podcast. There's one thing I genuinely want to say. Some of the very best men you will find among houndsmen, because most hound hunting demands it. You're not going to be able, I can't say everywhere, but in lots of places, deep swamps, big mountains, large country, you're not going to be a legit houndsman if you're not a legit man.
Yeah. That's a good point right there.
So within the hound hunting community is some of the very best of what America still has left. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I consider this book a bridge. I want it to be a bridge between really rough men who don't see the need for Christianity and not so rough men who are Christians, where they both can cross the bridge and get something from each other.
I'll tell you what I saw out of it. I saw men that I identify with, like your dad and like your Papaw Barry. I knew what kind of men they were, you know, and they're men that I would take with me into a fight.
Yep.
And no questions asked. But they were also so developed that they weren't afraid to. They were tough enough to be Christians.
Oh, yeah.
They were tough enough to be family men. They were tough enough to be good husbands. They were tough enough to be good dads. And they didn't let anything stand in the way of any of that. They were going to do their duty.
But see, one of the things, too, is you need to get women to understand some things about men. And what I mean by that is, in my dad and my grandpa's generation, a good man was basically a man who was faithful to his wife and worked hard to provide.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. If he did those two things, he was a good man.
Yeah.
And now so much has been added to that. You got to go to the ballet. You got to do
You got to get in touch with
You
your
got to
emotional
get in
side.
touch with your emotional side. If my poor old dad had to get in touch with his feminine side, he'd be running in circles.
Well, maybe we can get Martha to write one called The Old Women,
It's
The Old Ladies.
It's amazing what all we expect out of a guy now that truly has nothing to do with being a legit man at all. And then they get mad at him for hunting. And I don't understand that at all, because I tell women, men are going to do something. You might as well let them do something productive, something good, something that's not got them in the mess all the time. And when Martha and I met each other, we had a discussion about this hunting business. And we talked about it. And, of course, her dad was a hound guy. And I said, let's just make an agreement up front about this business. I said, my only hobby is hound hunting. I said, that's it. That's all I do. And I said, if you will leave me alone during hunting season, when it's not hunting season, we'll do whatever you want to do. We've never had an argument. We've been married 32 years this year. We've never had an argument about hunting. She supports it. She's for it. She sees the value in it. She believes it is better for you than a lot of alternatives.
That's right.
And so while we're talking about the men being men, I think we also need a generation of young girls that are taught what a man is and appreciate him for being a man.
That's right.
Not trying to make another woman out of him.
Yeah, it seems like we get more confused about that all the time.
Yep.
Yep. Well, Tracy, I'm going to try to get home tonight before. So.
Can I just say, if you're interested in the book, you can find it on Amazon.
Yep. Tell them the name.
You just go on Amazon and type in T.L. Jones.
I was going to ask you what, because it's not going to be under Tracy. It's going to be under T.L. Jones.
No, everybody asks me about that, so let me just mention that. My mom named me Tracy because she wanted to name me Mark. And right before I was born, I had a cousin born. They named him Mark. So she had to think of a different name.
Yeah.
And just picked Tracy. None of my family called me Tracy. It was always Trace.
Yeah.
I should have had it legally changed years ago and just dropped the Y. Because if anybody that knows me, you will hear them say Trace.
Yeah.
Mom, Dad, the whole 9 yards. Cousins. When I was pastoring in Montana, I had a family who sat outside of our church that wouldn't come in because Tracy was on the sign and they thought it had a woman pastor.
Really?
Yep. I went to preach a meeting for another preacher who wouldn't put Tracy on the flyer he was handing out because he didn't want people to think he was having a woman preacher.
No kidding.
Yeah, he put Tennessee Jones. Just made it up out of thin air.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, well, if it's going to be a problem, I'm just going to do something. So on anything public, my Facebook,
TL.
the book, I just put TL.
Mm-hmm.
And people that don't know me have just got to calling me TL. And it don't matter to me either way, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for the book, you put in TL Jones, The Old Men.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great book. Father's Day's coming up.
Graduation's
coming up. There's all kinds of reasons. You don't need a reason. You don't need a holiday to buy this book. You just need to get it and read it. And you need to share it. You need to share it with my son-in-laws are all going to get one.
And you have 5 books you're going to be giving away through this podcast.
Yep. Leading up to Father's Day. So we'll be watching the social media stuff for that, and we'll figure out how we're gonna give those books away. I appreciate you donating those.
I'm glad you come by today. I'm glad whoever canceled.
Yeah. It's always a good time come down here to Greenville, that's for sure. Well, Tracy, thanks for your time. Guys, like we said, you can find the book on Amazon. Imagine if you hit Tracy up on the Facebook, he can give you that information too, but his Facebook page is TL Jones. I know you've been looking at it. Everybody looks at your stuff.
If you want a signed copy, which I'm glad to do, the only way to get that is either contact me through Facebook or email me at laddertreepublishers@gmail.com.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, this is Fair Chase.